Hey friends, this is Heather, and you are listening to Brewing Murder and Mystery. And as you can tell, for those of you that are watching, I already have my makeup done. And here's why. Because this case is a little bit on the shorter side, and I didn't actually think I would have enough time to get all of my makeup done before I was done with this episode. The downside is when I don't have something to do, I tend to just read my script that I have written up, and I'm going to try to make it not sound so like reporter. So hopefully I can do that. Grab your favorite comfort liquids, wine, coffee, whatever time of day that it is, water, whatever you're drinking. And we are going to talk about a Thomas Creech today. Before we do that, like, subscribe, ring that bell, do all the notification things because the support would really help my channel. And I just love knowing that there's other people out there that care about this kind of stuff too. And we will start talking about this case. Now, this case is kind of, I don't want to say dry, boring. I don't want to say that because you're going to be like, oh, well, click, and you're going to be done with me. The outcome is very interesting on this case. That's why I picked it. Okay. There's not a lot of information out there. I scoured the internet for other YouTubers who maybe have a, take on this story that I could maybe pull some inspiration from. And there was zero. Zero. I couldn't find them anyway. I could find some updated stuff, which we'll talk about at the end. But let's get into what we do know. All right. So we know that Thomas was born on September 9th of 1950 in Hamilton, Ohio. He grew up in a really unstable environment. I guess his parents were constantly fighting, constantly bickering, and this would actually lead to a divorce. Now, for whatever reason, his mom just like exited the picture and we know no more information about her. However, what we do know about his dad is that there must have been some kind of medical situation because he ended up having a nurse take care of him. I wasn't sure if this was a live-in nurse. I could not find anything about this. The only reason why we even know this information is because I listened to an interview where Thomas actually blames the male nurse for his dad's death, which he witnessed. Okay. I don't know what happened. He didn't go. He did not elaborate, no details. But what we do know is that he saw his dad die in his youth, and it was very traumatic for him. At least that is what he's claiming in this interview. Thomas's life was really difficult with his mom out of the picture, witnessing his dad die, and for whatever was going on, I don't know if he was making up these elaborate stories or maybe he was just like a pathological liar, but he had a really hard time fitting in because people were not sure if he was telling the truth and they couldn't verify a lot of the claims in his childhood. He did say that he basically ran away from his hometown and would become a drifter and travel across the country. And from what we can tell, he actually did travel like state to state, town to town. He has made it around the United States. On December 11th of 1969, he was sentenced to time in jail for an unarmed robbery. He was then paroled in 1972 and tried to make a go of it. He actually met a 17-year-old woman named Thomasina Lauren White, which I just thought was kind of funny, like Thomas and Thomasina. And this was in 1973, and they would get married. But Thomas could not keep himself out of trouble. Like, I don't know if it's the bad upbringing, the lack of father figure, but he ended up getting involved in a gang or some kind of like mob or something like this, and basically started becoming a drug mule for these people. Now, I'm not involved in gangs and drugs and all those things. I do consider myself a little bit street smart. Maybe it's from all the true crime that I've listened to, but I definitely would not be getting in on the bad side of a drug dealer. And I would think that the number one rule wouldn't be to try to blackmail one, but Thomas actually does this. I don't know what his outcome was that he wanted, but he basically told him that he had this little white book and that it was something he could take to the police, kind of like show off all the dealings of these people. And what happens? Well, of course, they're going to try to get a hold of this information. He wasn't home when these bad guys, like mob people, show up. But the unfortunate thing was that Thomasina was, and she was brutally beaten and taken advantage of. And then in their way to like discard the witness, they threw her out of a window thinking that she would die on impact. But she didn't. So she ends up having debilitating physical and mental injuries and sadly would have to go to a mental institution for probably PTSD if we're just honest about it. But the sad thing is, she just could not get over her injuries, both physically and mentally, and she ended up taking her own life. In the exact same year, Thomas would actually break the terms of his parole with a robbery of 13 cigarette cartons. And I'm just like, these are the things that make me think like you're an idiot, sir. You're an idiot. Like, did you not learn anything? The charges were actually dropped after he spent a short time in a psychiatric hospital to be mentally evaluated. They said that he was a model citizen inside of this and basically released him and just like let him go on his way. So I don't know if he was able to kind of like talk his way out of it and like blame it on his wife's situation. Maybe it was all because of his wife's situation, but he managed to avoid jail time, even breaking his parole. He would end up moving back to Portland, Oregon, which is where he'd spent some time earlier in his travels. And he would find a job as a sexton for St. Mark's Episcopal Church. Is that right? Episcopal. What a weird word. A sexton is basically a fancy word for like a grounds maintenance janitor. So he would maintain the building, and if some of these churches have cemeteries attached to them, so if they would have, he would have maintained that. I don't know if this church did. That was just the brief explanation of what a sexton is. But Thomas would leave this job when a body of a man was discovered on the grounds of the church. Again, that's suspicious. Like, if it wasn't you, why'd you leave, buddy? But he abruptly left. Thomas would then end up meeting a 17-year-old woman named Carol Spalding in 1974, which makes me think like, wow, he got over that first wife really quick because this is literally a year later. And on November 6th of 1974, Thomas and Carol were hitchhiking to Idaho. They were trying to get from Lewiston to Denali when two house painters, one by the name of Edward Thomas Arnold, who was 35, and John Wayne Bradford, who was 40, decided to pick up the pair. This would be the worst mistake those two could make because for whatever reason, we have no clear evidence on what provoked this attack, but Thomas pulls out a rifle and shoots them both in the head. He did bury the bodies off of Highway 55 near Denali, and the blood-splattered car, which was a 1956 Buckeye Century, and the bodies of the men were discovered the very next day. So I'm like, dude, you can't even bury bodies accurately? Like, okay. While police were on the hunt for the murders of Mr. Arnold and Mr. Bradford, Thomas was already making friends. He had befriended a 26-year-old man named Gene Hilby, and he would actually go to Gene and ask him to bury the rifle, which Gene did, but he claimed that he had no idea that the rifle was a murder weapon and used to kill Mr. Arnold and Mr. Bradford. Thomas, however, was already on the radar because there had been some suspicious like comments that he was sending this new senator, Gary Hart of Colorado, death threats. And there was some talk about him actually being involved in two previous murders by Oregon police. So they arrested Thomas. And when they had Thomas in the custody of the police findings, they would actually find out that the death threats were made up. Like somebody in the police force had made these false rumors. And I don't know why they would do that. Maybe it was like so we can open and shut this case and deal with these two murders that are on our hands. But for whatever reason, the police fabricated that entire story. Thomas would attempt to take his own life while he was in jail, and breaking a mirror, he would use the shards of glass, but he didn't actually cut his wounds very deep across his wrists. So he just really kind of made superficial injuries. And then, of course, by the time, I don't know, he tried to attempt it again, the police intervened. So there's like a running theme here. Like, this guy is like, I don't know. I just hate to say it, but it's like, you're bad at this, buddy. Like, come on here. Gene would actually plead guilty to hindering a murder investigation, but all he would end up getting is probation. But Thomas's girlfriend, who was then 18 by the time it went to trial, was tried as an adult. So the story that the two of them come up with is that these two men that picked them up as hitchhikers tried to rape Carol, and that's what started the fight. But I don't like, not a shred of that. Because why would two men pick up a couple and then like openly suggest that they're going to rape the boyfriend's girlfriend? Like, I don't know. I'm not saying that that couldn't happen, but it just seems really unlikely because you have a man there with you. I don't know. What do you guys think? Because I'm not buying that. I'm not buying it. So I don't know what Thomas saw in this opportunity, if it was like 15 minutes of fame or if maybe he was like a wackadoo. I don't know. But when he went to trial himself, he would actually shock everybody by claiming that he had murdered 42 people. Like, this is not helping your case, buddy. He said that he first murdered his friend at the age of 17 by drowning him in the Ohio area, moving to San Francisco, and then he would end up murdering a gay man. That's literally all he gave us for the reasonings. And then he would follow up his story by claiming that he was part of Hell's Angels and he was contracted to murder 5 more people. He would eventually tell authorities that there was apparently up to 100 victims, and he would tell them where these alleged bodies were and that he basically sacrificed them in satanic rituals. But the police investigated these areas and they could not find anything more than a cow bone. So, what was the point of that, Thomas? I don't know. Thomas would be convicted of the two painters' murders and be put on death row for these crimes. But while in jail, Thomas couldn't seem to be the model citizen anymore, and he would go as far as attacking cellmate William Fisher. This altercation, William would be severely injured. Now, there was a gag order put on this incident, so we don't know any more than the fact that he had some serious facial injuries. The police, who were still working to determine if these 42 alleged murders and satanic rituals were BS or not, actually came across the conclusion that it was completely fabricated. Because apparently, old Thomas had basically used a Playboy magazine's article word for word about satanic rituals. I would like to be in the room to just find out which police officer figured this out, because you just outed yourself too there, buddy. And who reads Playboy for the articles? Isn't that like the running joke that nobody reads the articles in there? But here we have a police officer putting, I just thought it was really ironically funny. So, however, Thomas's victims, he did actually get connected to 9 total murders, but none of them were of any kind of sacrificial way. Thomas was a self-proclaimed serial killer at this point. He never actually admitted to murdering Arnold or Bradford. For the crimes, Thomas was actually sentenced to death by hanging. And in 1976, Thomas ended up having a good lawyer that would appeal after appeal after appeal. And then Thomas offered to stand trial for some of his killings in Oregon and California as a ditch effort to get him a longer death row sentence, which is really strange. It's kind of like, we'll put a hold on putting you to death if you go to trial to see if you're guilty of these other murders. I mean, I guess for a lawyer's perspective, if it works, it works. And it worked. Thomas would be convicted of the following deaths: George Lee Stanton, Charles Thomas Miller. That was the man that was found in the church. He was 22 years old. William Dean, also 22, Rig Ry I don't know how to pronounce this one. Riogli. Sorry, buddy. I'll put it on the screen. A 50-year-old Vivian Robbins, 70-year-old Rule Schrouder, and Daniel Walker, claiming that some of these were revenge killings due to people who had harmed his first wife. Thomas, who had been waiting for his death sentence by hanging, managed to get lucky because the United States Supreme Court barred automatic death sentences, turning his death penalty into life in jail sentence. However, not long after he managed to be moved to Idaho State Correction Institution, he would have a run-in with another inmate named David Jensen. David was in jail serving time as a 22-year-old for car theft. According to his family, he had a mental state of approximately a 12-year-old boy, was physically disabled on top of this, and, well, he ended up being the last and final victim to Thomas. Thomas was put in charge of some janitorial duties despite protests of 2 prosecutors who said that he was dangerous and a threat to others around him. As part of his job as a janitor, Thomas would have to clean up. Well, David spilled milk on the prison cafeteria floor. Thomas's job was literally to just mop up the milk, but this threw Thomas into a rage and he ended up beating David with a sock full of batteries. He was so hard on him that he stomped David's head through a grate on the floor. Like that is that's not anger issues. That's like demon possession issues. As insanity. The brutality of this murder would actually put him back on death row through the conviction of Idaho's court system. As of today, Thomas has been the longest living death row inmate in Idaho State. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection on February 28th of this year, 2024. Now, here's what ended up happening. After attempting to find a vein for this lethal injection 8 different times, both arms, both legs, all of the veins that they tried would end up collapsing, making it impossible for them to end Thomas's life. Some people are actually claiming that Thomas purposefully dehydrated himself because he was so afraid of dying, but no evidence has been brought forward at this time to prove that that was actually what Thomas did. Due to this, he was taken back to his cell, and now the government is trying to figure out what to do with him. Will he just live out the rest of his days in prison? Or is there actually talk going around that Idaho will be opening the idea for a new law to put people to death by firing squad? However, they have nowhere to carry out this plan if that actually were to follow through. So, what is going to happen with Thomas Creech? What do you think should happen with Thomas Creech? Do you think he should just continue to live out his days in jail? David's family, who claimed they aren't for the death penalty, said that this case is so different and that they want it to be dealt with. They are tired. It's like, when is this going to end already? Thomas has blood on his hands, no matter if he didn't kill hundreds of people. They want justice for their family member, and they're tired of paying their own tax dollars to keep this family murderer alive. This wasn't as detailed of a case, honestly, because there's not a lot of information out there. I just listened to interview after interview of Thomas rambling, and you can look them up yourselves too, but they're actually incredibly boring. Like, for a serial killer, at least a self-proclaimed one, I found this case to just be like boring. Sorry. It's boring. I know. I know. So why would I do this case so you can hear about it? Well, basically because I think that it's completely crazy that he actually survived, if you can call it that, lethal injection. He is still alive. I mean, his death sentence actually expired, which is unusual. So I thought that was worth sharing and mentioning. And like I said, the fact that nobody else is covering this. So it was just interesting to hear the information, and I really wanted to put it out there for you guys. This is one crazy case to see how we don't know what to do with people if they don't die. Like, this guy just keeps getting a lucky break after a lucky break. It's just crazy. And what do you think it's like? Why is he just a self-proclaimed serial killer because he has nothing better going on? I don't know. I feel like this was just one of those people who like literally threw their lives away, and I'm not really sure why. But it was interesting enough, and after last case that I did that was so much information, I felt like my mind was going to melt. It was kind of refreshing to have a case that was just so cut and dry. I don't know. You let me know what you think. Please list down below who you want to hear me talk about, and I would love to look into that for you. But until next time, guys, stay safe out there and stay away from self proclaimed serial killers. Bye.